honesty, it began when I was a kid. I was a pretty awkward little kid growing up on a very kind of aggressive, very athletic suburban town, like in Long Island, outside of New York City, and I was very badly bullied through elementary, middle school, and even early into high school. That was me at that time. Not the baby, but that's my dad. And he was a good 25 years or more older than all the other kids' fathers. He just turned 92. He fought in World War II. And when I was going through this bullying, which was pretty much a daily encounter with violence, for me, often what it was is like the walk from school to home. There would be multiple guys kind of waiting in the body to attack me, to punch me, to kick me, assault me. It was so consistent that my arms were bruised. They weren't black and blue, they were just kind of permanent shade of yellow. And when I would talk to my dad, and I don't do this to say he's a bad father, but he couldn't understand what I was trying to say to him. He couldn't come to a way to help me process it and get through it, or even allow me to feel like he had my back. He would say, toughen up, fight back, it's your fault if you can't fix it. Be a man. And, that was really hard for me. It was really hard because you stop kind of wanting to tell the story. You start to feel like no one's going to listen. And the story starts to not make sense. I think that experience is incredibly common. And it's a refrain that actually repeats itself in our film. But I think far too many folks look at bullying as a rite of passage, as an inevitability. When people try and speak about it, they're kind of shut down, and the experience is minimized. And this is reflected in society as a whole. It's reflected in our schools. It's reflected in almost every way that we might encounter that. That's where we've been. We've been in this state where people think that this just isn't this real thing, right? Until very, very recently, in the last few years, things have started to change. So, as I was thinking about where I might go as a filmmaker, and as you heard, I do tend to tackle films that deal with social justice, things that you could say are political, although this is not a political film, but it's certainly a film about social justice. I thought I ought to turn the camera in some way inward and try and process this experience and this story. And as I thought about it more and more, I realized that what we don't have is a frame. So we have a sense of kids will be kids and just work it out and man up and all the things that we've heard reflected. But there's not ever been a frame to say, this is bullying, and it's actually violent and terrifying and scary. And it ought to be considered a human rights issue. It's not just something, it's a very, very serious assault to the dignity and to the freedom of kids all over the country and the world to have a safe place to go to school and to learn and to thrive. And for far, far too many, it's not the case. And so as we started to get into it, one of the first things that really grabs you are the statistics, right? We think, and the numbers are probably higher, that annually over 13 million kids across the United States are victims of bullying. Think about that. That's a huge, huge number of youth that are being punched, insulted, kicked, having their dignity taken away from them, being told that they're worthless, over and over and over again. One of the manifestations of that is that every day across the country, 160,000 students are simply too afraid to go to school. They are too afraid to go to school. Only like a year and a half ago did the American Academy of Pediatricians finally acknowledge that this is a public health issue, public health crisis, you could say. We did not want to look at this, and so as a result, people sit and they spend, millions and millions and millions of dollars looking at why we're not achieving in our schools, looking at why we have high dropout rates, right? Well, what about when we start to correlate the impact of bullying on kids that drop out? Either physically they drop out, or emotionally and psychologically they drop out. So, there's so many implications from bullying that, impact not just what you might consider to be the health or well-being of one student, but if you were to take it into the larger context, they're actually impacting the quality of education in America. So sometimes you have to make arguments like that if you want to have a hearing or be heard on Capitol Hill, or if you want to be heard by legislators at the state level, because they think in those terms. So we have to kind of fight with those terms. So the more I learned about how common this experience was, the more alarming it was. And then when we started looking for stories, it was like everywhere you turned. Everywhere you turned, you were hearing about children that we were losing, that had died by suicide. And there was a bullying story in that. You were hearing desperate pleas. If there was a local story about something that had happened, there would be 100 comments in that local story by other families, by other kids. If you got onto YouTube, you saw these incredible testimonies. It was just seemed like it was everywhere. And it reminded me of my first car was like a blue Honda Civic. And I remember, as I got in this car, suddenly all I saw on the road were blue Honda Civics. So it's like when you open your eyes to something, suddenly you see it's kind of all around you, and it's in your school, and it's in your community, it's in your state, it's potentially in your university. So with that bit of an introduction, I'm going to turn it over to the first clip from the film. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start you guys at the beginning of the film, and run it for about 15 minutes. And then stop, and I'll share some reflections, and then we'll get back into another second clip. Okay, so bear with me. So just switch over. Let's see. You can have lights, please. Volume up